The potato is the world's third largest food crop by production volume after corn and wheat. It's eaten on literally every continent. It's hard to imagine European or American cuisine without it. Now imagine the opposite, a government that bans growing this vegetable by law. Priests who call it the devil's fruit from the pulpit and forbid their congregations from touching it. An emperor who orders armed guards posted around the fields, not to protect the harvest from peasants, but to make the peasants think it was worth stealing. All of this really happened. Today we'll trace the potato's journey from a sacred crop of the Incas to a vegetable feared across all of Europe, and see what tricks, decrees, and even famine it took to finally get humanity to eat it. The potato was first cultivated by indigenous peoples in the mountains of South America, in what is now Peru and Bolivia, near Lake Titicaca, according to archaeological evidence, at least 7,000 years ago. For Andean civilizations, including the Incas, the potato was a dietary staple. They bred hundreds of varieties suited to growing at altitudes above 3,000 meters, where almost nothing else can grow. The Incas even developed a method of preserving potatoes by freezing and sun-drying them, a product called chuño, which could be stored for years. This made it possible to build food reserves against crop failure or war. Spanish conquistadors, who arrived in the region in the 1530s in search of gold, also took notice of this unassuming plant. The first written European accounts of the potato in South America date to the mid-16th century. Around the 1570s, the potato first reached the Iberian Peninsula. The potato belongs to the nightshade family, the same family as belladonna, datura, and henbane, plants genuinely dangerous to humans. European botanists of the 16th and 17th centuries, classifying plants by their outward appearance and family traits, placed the potato in the same category as these poisonous species. It's worth saying something important here, something that wasn't just superstition. The fear was partly justified. The green parts of the potato, leaves, stems, and also green or sprouted tubers, really do contain the toxic compound solanine and can cause poisoning. The first Europeans who tried eating not the tubers but other parts of the plant, or who ate spoiled, greened potatoes, could genuinely get sick. This fed an already strong suspicion. In 1753, Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus gave the potato its scientific name, Solanum tuberosum, officially placing it in the same family as poisonous plants. For 18th century people, who relied heavily on botanical classification, this only confirmed that the vegetable couldn't be trusted. There was another factor too, a purely religious one. The potato is never mentioned in the Bible. In a society where eating habits were closely tied to religious tradition, the absence of any biblical mention of this new plant struck part of the clergy and peasantry as suspicious in itself, something God had not given people to eat. In France, suspicion of the potato escalated into an official ban. In 1748, the Parlement of Paris, a judicial body that at the time also held regulatory powers, banned the cultivation of potatoes within its jurisdiction. The justification was a widespread belief that potatoes caused leprosy, a skin disease. This belief had no scientific basis, but it was remarkably persistent. The potato's bumpy, uneven skin was compared to the outward signs of the disease, and, by the logic of like produces like, common in folk medicine of the time, people concluded the food was dangerous. The Parlement of Paris's ban formally remained in effect for nearly a quarter century, until 1772. Meanwhile, in neighboring Prussia, the problem was being solved by a different method, not persuasion, but order. Frederick II of Prussia, known as Frederick the Great, saw the potato not as a threat, but as a solution to hunger and unstable grain harvests. As early as 1756, he issued a decree requiring peasants in certain regions of the kingdom to grow potatoes, with the state supplying seed potatoes free of charge. The problem was that decrees and free seed alone didn't change the peasants' deep distrust of this baffling vegetable. According to a popular account among historians, Frederick resorted to a psychological trick. He ordered potatoes planted in the royal fields and had guards posted around them, but instructed the guards to keep watch conspicuously carelessly, allowing peasants to secretly steal the tubers at night. The logic was simple. Something guarded so strictly must be valuable. Something people steal is something people want to try. A similar strategy, deliberately weak guarding of the fields as a way to provoke theft and curiosity, is also attributed to the French agronomist Antoine-Augustin Parmentier several decades later in the 1780s, when he was promoting the potato in France after the Paris ban was lifted. Food historians treat the specific details of both these stories with some caution. The sources don't always allow every detail to be confirmed. But the fact of a state campaign to spread potato cultivation through decree, free seed, and public demonstration is documented for both countries. In France, Antoine-Augustin Parmentier went even further in his efforts to change the potato's reputation. He hosted dinners for influential people of his time, where the potato was served as an elegant dish, and according to accounts from the period, he persuaded King Louis XVI to wear a potato flower in his lapel and Queen Marie Antoinette to wear potato blossoms in her hair at court appearances. The intent was straightforward. If the queen herself wore the plant, peasants would start to see it as worthy of attention rather than as feed for animals or food for the poor. Up until that point, the potato in many regions of France had been grown mainly as pig feed, not as human food. Gradually, over the final decades of the 18th century, attitudes did begin to shift, partly because of campaigns like this, and partly for a thoroughly practical reason. The potato produced more edible calories per hectare than grain crops, and it withstood poor weather conditions better, which became increasingly important during periods of bad wheat harvest. In the Russian Empire, the potato followed a similar path, but met with even sharper resistance. It was brought to Russia under Peter I in the late 17th to early 18th century, but at first, it didn't spread widely. In the second half of the 18th century, Catherine II issued orders encouraging the spread of potato cultivation as a defense against famine. The real large-scale forced transition came later, in the 1840s, under decrees from Pavel Kiselyov, Minister of State Domains, when the state ordered state peasants to plant a mandatory share of their land with potatoes. The reaction from part of the peasantry and the Orthodox clergy was far from uniformly positive. People sometimes called the potato the devil's apple, precisely because of its foreign, mysterious origin, its absence from scripture, and the suspicion that the plant was connected to evil forces. In a number of provinces, the forced introduction of potato cultivation in the 1840s sparked open peasant protests and unrest, known in historiography as the potato riots. Peasants were resisting the compulsory nature of the new crop, not the potato itself. By the mid-19th century, the potato had already become a dietary staple for millions of poor families across Europe, especially in Ireland, where it provided the lion's share of calories for the rural population thanks to its high yield on small plots of land. It was precisely this dependence that made the catastrophe of 1845 to 1852 so devastating. A fungal disease, potato blight, destroyed harvests for several years in a row, causing the Great Famine in Ireland, which historians estimate killed around 1 million people, while roughly another million emigrated, mostly to the United States. This tragic episode reveals the other side of the same story. A vegetable once feared as poisonous and demonic became, within a few decades, so central to the survival of entire nations that its loss turned into a mass humanitarian catastrophe. Modern economic historians, including researchers Nathan Nunn and Nancy Chien, in their study published in 2011, analyzed the impact of the potato spread on demographic change in 18th and 19th century Europe and Asia, and linked it to a notable population increase in regions that adopted the crop earlier and more widely, thanks to the potato's high caloric yield and reliable harvest compared to grain crops. In other words, the very same vegetable that clergy called the devil's fruit, and that parliaments banned by law out of fear of leprosy, transformed within a century or two into one of the factors that allowed parts of Europe to feed far more people than before. Today, the potato is the planet's third largest food crop by volume, after corn and wheat, and it's grown on virtually every continent, including regions with harsh climates where little else can produce such a yield. The story of the potato isn't a tale of superstitious people in the past, who were simply wrong. Part of the fear had real grounds. Green and sprouted potatoes really are toxic. But fear rooted in the real danger of one part of the plant grew into a total ban, a religious taboo, and even laws that lasted for decades until governments resorted to direct compulsion, psychological tricks, and the symbolic power of royal example to make people eat the very thing that would ultimately save them. A vegetable that today sits in every supermarket in the world and costs next to nothing was once the subject of church bans, parliamentary decrees, and peasant revolts. How ordinary a product seems to us today tells us nothing about how strange and dangerous it was once considered. Next time you eat an ordinary fried or boiled potato, remember, this food was once officially banned by law in the capital of France, and in the Russian Empire it sparked open revolts. If this story surprised you as much as it surprised me when I researched it, hit like, it really helps the channel. And tell me in the comments, what other everyday food do you think has just as strange and contradictory a history? I read every comment.